Hi folks, how you doing? It's James, JT at the movies, and we are back for the 17th episode, the 17th instalment of my Debriefing 007 series. We're on the home stretch here, folks. I watched all of the Brosnan films very recently, and I'm shooting these vlogs for them back to back, so they'll be coming out very quick in the run-up to No Time to Die. But let's take a look now at 1995's GoldenEye. So 1995 was the year that Bond returned to cinemas. We'd last seen him in 1989's Licence to Kill, starring Timothy Dalton, his second and final appearance, and if you're familiar with me and my channel, it's my favourite James Bond film of all time, is that I'm gutted that we didn't get a third. Now, before I jump into talking about GoldenEye and the plot recap and everything, I want to talk a little bit about the hiatus. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, but I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about it. So, after 1989's Licence to Kill came out, there were lukewarm box office and critical reception to that film. But that didn't deter MGM or Dan Jack and Eon Productions from making Bond 17, which was tentatively announced for a summer of 1991 release. It was going under the working title of Property of a Lady, one of the few Ian Fleming titles that's still yet to be used, even though aspects of the story made its way into films like Octopussy. And the story was going to see Bond going up against drug lords in China. There were going to be action set pieces in Scotland, and there was even talk of some story elements that actually later made it into GoldenEye, with Bond having a former friend and agent turn into a villain. The plan was still for Timothy Dalton to star in the role, but unfortunately MGM ran into some legal troubles and it held the whole thing up. And by the time that they managed to get that resolved in 1994, Dalton's contract had actually expired, the original contract that he signed. He agreed because he was a close friend of the Broccoli family and really, keen to sort of do one more and bring to quote Dalton himself, bring the best of everything from The Living Daylights and Licence to Kill into one package and make a nice rounded off trilogy. He agreed that he'd come back and do the one more film, but Cubby Broccoli expressed at the time that he couldn't just come back and do one more after such a long hiatus, that they couldn't be then seen to be having to recast Bond again, and that it could kill the franchise dead in the water. So Dalton then decided that it was time for him to step down, that he'd done his two, and that his adventures were in the past. The producers then turned to the man that they actually initially offered the job to before Timothy Dalton came aboard, and due to scheduling conflicts, he actually couldn't accept it, and they cast Pierce Brosnan finally as James Bond in 1994. So there was a press release and they announced that they were going to be making GoldenEye. The title itself is derived from the name of Ian Fleming's home in Jamaica and has been used for other Bond properties as well, such as an Ian Fleming biopic about his time in the war. But yeah, so the title was not taken from Fleming's works, but was inspired by Ian Fleming, which I think is a nice touch and a nod to the whole sort of continuity of everything, if you like, and the larger world that Bond's from. Cubby Broccoli was in his advancing years, actually quite close to death, although I don't know whether that was publicly known at the time, and decided that he was going to take a step back on the production reins, and is an executive producer credited as a presenter on this film. And it's actually this time that his children take over. Michael Wilson, his stepson, and Barbara Broccoli, his daughter, take over the full producing duties. Michael Wilson had been producing the films with him since Octopussy, and Barbara had been working sort of in the background as an associate producer, an assistant to the director and things like that. But this was the first time that the two of them had co-produced a film with their father overseeing it, sort of thing. And like I say, he really had a hands-off role in this. The last thing that he sort of actively was part of, according to the behind the scenes and the making of, was the casting of Pierce Brosnan. He pretty much left everything else to them after that point. And do you know what? I think this film's a home run. It really could have gone one or two ways after such a long hiatus. There was a lot of public concern at the time as to whether Bond was still relevant, given that all the stories were largely set against the backdrop of the Cold War and the tensions between Allies and the Soviet Union. And in the interim period, the Berlin Wall had come down and the Cold War had ended, and they even reference it in the film. You're a relic of the Cold War. You're a misogynist, sexist dinosaur. That's really got nothing to do with the Cold War. It's just, that Bond's attitude was maybe outdated, and does he fit into the then modern world of the mid to late 90s? And I think that they really address all that quite well, whilst keeping all the sort of the tropes and the cliches and the things that you would expect in a Bond film there, and done well. Pierce Brosnan is really, really good in the role. You can tell there's a few scenes in it where he's a little unsure of himself. Like the first time he says Bond, James Bond, in the casino scene where he's meeting Xenia and he's doing the sort of this one's an admiral, you're a commander. Sort of that whole scene where they're sort of one upping each other. And he's name's Bond, James Bond. You can tell he's a little bit like, bloody hell, I'm in somebody else's shoes here, sort of thing. Whereas in Tomorrow Never Dies, and I would say Even the World Is Not Enough, he's more relaxed into it and it's more his own. But he handles the action incredibly well. He's believable when he's doing the action set pieces and the stunts. He looks really cool in the part. And obviously he does the whole charming the young ladies bit very well. And I think evokes the best of Connery and Moore, which I think really is all that any Bond successor could really do at that point. Because whilst Dalton's gained a popularity now, at the time he sort of left a bit of a sour taste in audiences' mouths because his films were really dark and really down to earth and serious. I think that the supporting cast of this film is really great. We've got Sean Bean playing Alec Trevelyan, who is Bond's former ally and close friend, and is actually the leading villain of this piece. And this was something really interesting that I was surprised that the Bond series hadn't done before, a rogue 00 agent. You've got Isabella Scorupco as the leading lady of the film, Natalia, and she's really good as well. She's a really strong lady, can handle herself, doesn't take any nonsense from Bond or any of the bad guys. You've got Alan Cumming in there as Boris. Judi Dench takes over as M in this one, which I think is absolutely inspired casting. She was fantastic in her tenure as M. The story of this film has been developed as far back as 1993 in terms of the GoldenEye that we all know and love. And the original story was going to be that the rogue 00 agent was actually going to be Bond's sort of mentor and the person that trained him up through the ranks. And it was going to be more of a father-son dynamic than potentially a sort of a brothers or best friends sort of angle. And they were still expecting Timothy Dalton to come back and star, and they were looking at eyeing up people such as Anthony Hopkins to play 006. And you can still see sort of traces of that in the final film, what they were intending to do. Certainly the scenes in there that Pierce Brosnan would have done, that would have lent themselves more to Timothy Dalton than they do to Brosnan's performance, and he gets a much softer approach to things, more in line with his performance in the later films. And as well, the whole sort of timeline with Alec Trevelyan's backstory and the betrayal with the Leanne Cossack's story doesn't really sort of tally up with how old the character would be, whereas if it was an older person, Anthony Hopkins would have been, I don't know, late 50s at the time, which would have put him being born in the 40s when that film came out. There are hangovers from it, but the film that we got is that basic story. They amended a few things, like I say, to make it fit Brosnan's Bond better, and a few things were naturally updated. Martin Campbell was brought in to direct, and he did an absolutely fantastic job of bringing Bond back to audiences after a hiatus and reintroducing a new Bond. He's done that twice. He did that for Pierce Brosnan, and he did it for Daniel Craig as well in Casino Royale. Both were home runs, and I'm hoping that if he's available and if he's interested, when we do get the new James Bond after Daniel Craig finishes with No Time to Die, which is out in a few weeks, can you believe it? I hope that they can maybe coax him back. That being said, if Cary Fukunaga does a fantastic job, they might want to bring him back, and fans might want him back to do a sequel, much like they did with Sam Mendes and they have done with Guy Hamilton or Terence Young and other directors that have come back over the years. So the basic plot of this film, we start with the pre-title sequence as always. The gun barrel comes across and we are in Russia. We see Bond doing a fantastic opening stunt that rivals that of the opening sequence of The Spy Who Loved Me, where we get all these sort of wide shots and not really any close-up shots of Bond, so we don't really know that it's James. We know it's James Bond, but we don't know it's James Bond, if that makes sense. And we see him setting up a bungee system, and he dives off a dam in an absolutely spectacular fashion, and then breaks into a Russian base. There's a really brilliant scene that I think Roger Moore would have had a great time with, where he comes in the roof of a toilet cubicle, and there's a chap in there doing his business. He lifts the paper down and, pardon me, forgot to knock, and then, gives him one of them. We soon then meet up with Bond and his fellow agent 006, who, as I said, is going to become the villain of this piece. But at this point, they're both still working for MI6, and they have a really close relationship, and the chemistry is really great between Sean Bean playing 006, Alec Trevelyan, and obviously Pierce Brosnan's Bond. They infiltrate the base, but then the Russian army soon find that they're there, and then there's a climactic battle where Bond believes Trevelyan to be shot, so he sets bombs to blow up, and he doesn't set them for the agreed time limit that he and Trevelyan had agreed, because he believes Trevelyan to be dead, so he sets them to go off sooner than what they would have done. Bond makes a daring escape on a motorbike and then drives it off a cliff into a plane that he's been chasing, throws the pilot out and takes the plane off, and we're into the title sequence, which is a great song and feels a little bit reminiscent of Goldfinger, and you can tell that the producers were really trying to evoke all the classic themes that Bond embodies for this film and make everyone think it's a real classic Bond adventure. I'd say they were very much successful in doing that, really. There are very few sort of negative or constructive points I think most people would have for this film. Not anything that anybody would really sort of, want to get into sort of really bashing the film about, I would say. I could be wrong. I'm sure there are people out there that don't like this film, but I've always really enjoyed it. We then, actually, after the title sequence, get a little card that comes up and says that it's 9 years later, which I thought was a really nice nod, because whilst the series up to this point hasn't really done strong continuity from film to film, it about links up with the sort of time that would have elapsed between Licence to Kill and where we are with GoldenEye. And Bond's under evaluation as well from one of the MI6 evaluators, Caroline. And it would make sense that if he's been put back into active duty, that they wouldn't just put him straight back in, and there would be evaluations and training, and a bit like what we see in Skyfall, really, where he's off the active roster for a bit and has to be re-evaluated. So I thought that whether that was intentional or not, it was a nice nod to the fact that actually Bond had gone rogue in the last film, and that maybe the world had changed a little bit while he was away. During the evaluation scene, Bond gets into a rather cheeky little car chase with one of this film's leading villains, Xenia Onatopp. She's played expertly by Famke Janssen. A really, really great character introduction. And it's a really great scene as well, played incredibly well. Bond's in the DB5, she's in a Ferrari, and they're racing down this really, really sort of narrow mountain road, and there's a bicycle team sort of cycling up the hill, and there's all the peril. The only thing that sort of lets that scene down really is the score by Eric Serra. In fact, that's the only thing really in the film, for my money, that lets it down, is the lack of a traditional James Bond score. But I get that they wanting to try something different, and sometimes it works, but in this scene it doesn't. Anyway, we later catch up with Bond and Xenia at the casino local to where they were, and after a flirtatious scene where they're sort of playing a bit with each other, Bond reveals his hand, so to speak, and that he's in law enforcement, and sort of gives her a bit of a you need to watch yourselves type of warning, and she brushes him off quite coldly, excusing herself with an admiral that she's been seeing. Bond then later goes to sort of surveil her, and under M's orders is basically asked to look but don't get involved without further sort of permission, as it were. We then cut to Xenia, who's gone back aboard the Admiral's yacht, and they're having an intimate moment that soon turns quite aggressive, and her sort of method of killing people, if you like, is through sort of strangulation with her legs or whatever during sex, and she ultimately kills the Admiral, stealing his credentials, as he is actually part of a group that are demoing a new fighter jet that is impervious to the GoldenEye satellite, which is the main sort of weapon and the sort of the MacGuffin, if you like, of the film. So the next day, Bond, realising that Xenia's going to steal the copter, tries to go and stop her, but he's too late. He's stopped by the armed guards, and she makes away with the helicopter. We then cut over to Russia, and we're introduced to the film's leading lady, Natalia, and she is a computer expert working for the Russian military at the GoldenEye satellite station. Obviously, GoldenEye, as I just mentioned, is a satellite that is a weapon when fired from space that can cripple their enemies' computer systems. And obviously, it's later used in this film by the film's main villain, with the intent of using it to wipe out the UK's financial records and sort of send them back to the Stone Age, for want of a better expression. Whilst they're working there, we're introduced to Boris as well, who's another character in this film who's later revealed to be one of the villain's henchmen, although he appears at the moment to be a friend of Natalia's. Xenia and Oromov, who was the Russian general who led the attack in the pre-title sequence, then turn up to GoldenEye and explain that they're running a test. Once they realise that they've got control of the weapon and that they can take that, they shoot everybody there and set the weapon to blow the base up. This alerts the British government that GoldenEye is actually real, because they just believe it to be myth and urban legend at this point, and it also lets them know that it's in the wrong hands. So M finally brings Bond in on the case and gives him a real sort of stern talking to, and it's a great introduction from Judi Dench. She's absolutely fantastic. Bond's sort of trying to almost arrogantly show her the ropes sort of thing, and there's the scene that your predecessor used to keep cognac in the drawer or whatever, and she's like, I prefer bourbon, and she gives him the, as I mentioned earlier, the sexist misogynist dinosaur speech. And but then I really liked at the end of the M briefing that she just sort of said, Bond, come back alive. So there is actually almost that maternal instinct there to him, and she is a fan of him, even if she's not a fan of his methods and his ways, if that makes sense. But I really liked the scene. I thought it was played really well. Dench was fantastic. Pierce Brosnan was brilliant as well. Just a really well played scene. We then get the Desmond Llewellyn Q scene, and that's just your typical sort of Q scene in Q's lab. He doesn't really appear much out of that. He's probably a little bit too old really to be doing it, but I'm really glad that they kept him back, because he's really the only hangover from the previous 16 entries. Even though the first 20 films of the series are sort of coupled together, these do feel like a bit of a soft reboot, and I suppose it's a soft reboot anytime a new actor takes over, but there really was a continuity gap sort of between License and GoldenEye, so it's really nice that Desmond's there just to bridge that gap and say, yeah, this is still the same thing. We also meet Samantha Bond's Moneypenny. She plays Moneypenny for all of Pierce Brosnan's tenure, and I think she's a really great successor to Lois Maxwell, and much more in line with where the character should be, along with how Naomi Harris is doing a great job with it now. Bless her, unfortunately, Caroline Bliss was just not really the right person for that job. She gave it her best go, but it didn't really work. But back to GoldenEye. Bond then sets off to Russia to investigate what's going on. He teams up with CIA agent Jack Wade, who's played by Joe Don Baker, who Bond fans will probably remember played Whitaker, the main villain of The Living Daylights. It's one of the rare occurrences where an actor comes back to play two different roles in a Bond film, Maud Adams being the obvious other one. Bond and Wade then go to meet Valentin Sokovsky, who is played expertly again by Robbie Coltrane. He's absolutely fantastic in this, and he sets up a meeting with the film's lead villain, Alec Trevelyan, who at this moment in time is known as Yanis, because we believe Alec to be dead. Valentin sets up the meeting, but the meeting is through Xenia, who tries to flirt with Bond and then tries to kill him the same way, sort of with the strangulation with the thighs, and we get the no more foreplay bit, which is a really funny scene. Then Bond overcomes her and insists that she take him back to see Yanis, and it's at that point that we're introduced to Sean Bean as the villain properly, and you really get the sense that Bond's sort of taken aback that his friend's sort of still alive, but actually has gone completely rogue. After a bit of a villain monologuing scene and a bit of a catch-up, Bond's left for dead in the helicopter that was stolen earlier in the film, which is set to blow up. Natalia's in the other seat. She manages to rouse Bond, and they manage to escape. They then try to go back to the Russian military to explain what's going on, but Oromov has already got there and has planted this whole story that Bond is actually the villain, and that it's nothing to do with him whatsoever. And then Oromov decides that he's going to kill his commanding officer, which leads Bond and Natalia to escaping. A massive chase ensues through St. Petersburg with the absolutely fantastic tank chase. They did bring in another composer for that bit of the film, because the score that Eric Serra provided just wasn't Bond enough for what was going on, so they brought in a composer to do a traditional Bond overture for that scene, and it really lifts the feel of the movie up. Bond ends up escaping in the tank, but Natalia is captured once again by Oromov and taken back to Trevelyan on his armoured train. Bond catches up with them and infiltrates the train. There is another scene yet again with Bond and Trevelyan before they leave, saying that the train's going to be blown up, and sort of makes reference to the bomb that Bond set at the beginning of the film, because Trevelyan, obviously having not died in the start of the film, is now facially scarred from that explosion. Bond and Natalia manage to escape and head to Cuba, where they know that the second GoldenEye satellite is, thanks to some hacking that Natalia managed to do with the computers. Again, they're aided by Joe Don Baker and infiltrate the base once they find out that it's underneath a reservoir. Trevelyan reveals his grand plans and the reason for why he's wanting to do it in a fairly sort of traditional Bond monologue sort of way. And then the final battle ensues, and Bond and Trevelyan battle it out to the death. And I really think Trevelyan's death is great because there's a line that's sort of said back and forth between the two characters throughout the film. For England, James. For England, Alec. And then at the end, when he's about to kill him, he goes, "For England, James." And Bond's obviously had enough of his nonsense by this point and goes, "No, for me," and then lets him drop to his death. And then it's a sort of, traditional Bond ending, which I think was the right way for them to go with this sort of film after such a long period of time away. Bond and Natalia are having an intimate moment in the fields outside the bad guy's base when Wade and his Marines turn up to escort them back to to a US base where they can, as he puts it, debrief themselves. And it's just a really great ending. It is a by the numbers Bond film, and Bond's story is this one. It really just does everything that it needs to do. It doesn't stray from the formula. And because it's had such a large amount of time away, it is, like I say, up until the gap between Spectre and No Time to Die, the largest gap between any Bond film. I do think that it's a really sensible choice on the part of the filmmakers to keep this Bond film in line with many of the classic elements that Bond fans know and love, and for him to go on a fairly traditional adventure that follows the Bond formula quite well. And with such a gap between Licence to Kill and this, if they'd have done something more adventurous, especially with introducing a new James Bond as well, it might have sunk the series. So I think they did really well with this film. Sean Bean is fantastic as the leading villain, and my only criticism of the character is I would have maybe liked to have seen them lean a little bit more into the fact that he's had the same training as Bond, he's of the same background, and maybe just seen a bit more about what that could do. They sort of, they talked about it. I can anticipate your every move, and is Q still making these little throwaway lines here and there, and they are fairly evenly matched in the final battle where they go sort of toe to toe with each other. But I would have maybe liked to have seen that lent into a little bit more. And like I say, some of the writing, there's very much a hangover for Dalton's style of Bond, and whilst Brosnan deals with it absolutely admirably, he really is great. You can tell from Tomorrow Never Dies onwards, they're writing for him and his portrayal of Bond, and the writing feels more, like I say, more in line with the character that he's playing. There's more quips and there's more, I would say that he's more Roger Moore than he is Sean Connery, though he does encompass, traits of both of them. I really enjoyed this film. I always have done, and it's one that I come back to fairly regularly, and it's one that I will gladly watch. When I'm not doing a run through of the series, sometimes I'll just think, do you know what? Tonight's a GoldenEye night, and I really enjoy it whenever I watch it. I never tire of it. I would give this film an 8 out of 10. So there we are, folks. That has been the 17th episode of Debriefing 007, where we've talked about 1995's GoldenEye, the first of 4 films starring Pierce Brosnan. I can't believe that we're on the home stretch of this review series. I'm not really sure what my big sort of overarching series is going to be when I finish this on the channel. But not to worry, because there's still 7 episodes yet to come. We've got Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, Die Another Day, and then the 4 Daniel Craig films as well. Let me know below in the comments, what were your thoughts on GoldenEye? And did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? Did you play the video game? We didn't talk about that in this review, but what a great video game that was. I'd love to have a natter with you about your thoughts on this film and Brosnan's Bond in general. Let me know down below. Please drop the video a thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please think about doing so. I'd love to have you stick around a little bit longer. Of course, it helps the channel to grow, and I'd love to see you next time as well. Above all else, folks, take care of yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you again really soon. Cheers.